Prime Minister of Britain. He is Michael Heaver. Michael, welcome.
How you doing, Paul? That's overplaying it slightly, but thank you very much.
Now, before the break, I was talking about this article, which I woke up to this morning. Absolutely enraged by it, as you can imagine. Theresa May has announced she'll basically front a new government body, or a government programme at least, to devote resources to tackling online abuse, which basically means mean comments on the internet, to, quote, better police the internet. We've also got the government funding a dedicated national security unit to tackle fake news and disinformation, which we know is a completely subjective term. Michael, I know the government can do more than one thing at a time, but can this country really afford to be policing speech so Theresa May can look good and so she can virtue signal? Or do you think there are more pressing matters, more pressing security matters that we should be concentrating right now in this country?
Well, as you mentioned, Paul, I mean, the situation in Britain now is quite extraordinary in terms of returning British jihadis. This is something that we at Westminster have been looking at for a number of months now. And I just want to lay this out to your viewers that aren't aware of this. This isn't just a British phenomenon. We're seeing this go on across Europe and right across the world. Hundreds and hundreds of jihadis that are so committed to Islamic State that they've gone out and supported Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, risked their lives to get there. These people are out there. About half of them have come back that went from Britain, have returned. And we're now in a situation where the government are basically saying a significant proportion aren't deemed to be of national security risk. Can you imagine how dedicated a jihadist, how sick you have to be to go and support these people that, you know, burn people alive, rape children, abuse people, kill people, torture people? These people are so committed they've gone over there. Hundreds have come back, and our government, our security services apparently are deeming them, hundreds of them, to not be worth scrutinising in terms of national security. That many of them may be walking the streets without any analysis at all. And this isn't just going on in Britain, as I say. This is right across Europe. And as you mentioned, to have hundreds of these people walking around in Britain, I think is horrifying. What's even more horrifying is it's going on, as I say, right across Europe in other countries. And you're right. The priority here, the number one priority for any government should be to protect the public, to protect the people of those countries. And yet we see this incredible situation where hundreds and hundreds of jihadis, hardened, potentially trained to kill, are back in the country and being assessed as not being of national security concern. It simply doesn't add up, and I think we need more answers on exactly who these people are.
Well, exactly. I mean, I contrast it to this. The fact that per year, this is a rough number, British police arrest 3,395 people every year for, quote, offensive online comments. Those are people who say things on Facebook. Yes, you may be offended by them. They may be racist. They may be Islamophobic. But they've got plenty of resources to devote to that. Meanwhile, you know, the BBC report, it's not practical for police to investigate all crime. So it's not just with the terrorism threat, it's with the crime threat as well. And yet they're constant. Theresa May is constantly banging on about, oh, online abuse. Yet that's actual resources, that's actual police time that's been dedicated to that. We also had another story today, Michael, which I mentioned on the show. There was a teacher in Bristol who was fired for telling a lesbian student, God loves you, a Christian teacher. They reported her to the government's counter-terrorism program, the PREVENT program, as a radicalization threat. She was fired from her job. You know, and meanwhile, those are the people being reported as terrorists, and she was investigated. It wasn't just laughed off, as it should have been. Meanwhile, as he said, you got hundreds of actual terrorists that have come back from Syria, from Iraq, fighting for ISIS, potentially beheading people, stoning people to death. And hundreds of them have just been let loose. They're not even under surveillance. Do you think it's actually related to a resource issue? Or is it just this general disregard for not treating Islamic terrorism with the importance it should be treated?
Well, let me say this, Paul. I mean, there's a new defence secretary in Britain called Gavin Williamson. And he came, and this is what really perplexes me about this situation. He came in, and Gavin Williamson basically said, rightly in my opinion, that jihadis that go abroad and support Islamic State should either be killed and certainly should never be let back into Britain. And yet, when you have a defence secretary in government saying that, the British policy appears to be something very different. So it seems to me that on one hand, you've got these ministers saying things like Rory Stewart was another one I remember, saying that these people shouldn't be allowed back, they should be killed abroad. And yet the actual policy is that hundreds are back. So then I start to ask the question, Paul. Then I start to ask the question, have these people been allowed back by the government? Has there been a deal done, some sort of conversation had? Or is it the case that a complete incompetence and weak borders have actually allowed these people to return and the government have only found out about it upon their return? Because I don't see how you marry up the fact that government ministers, including the defence secretary, are basically saying we should kill these people, they shouldn't come back, with the fact that right now, in this country, hundreds of them are back. I think we need a serious answer on that, how we can have, as I say, the government saying one thing, and yet government policy seems to be pointing towards a completely different reality, and a quite scary one, to be quite honest with you.
It's absolutely incredible. And I mean, after the last terror attack, I think it was the London Bridge attack, you know, Theresa May said enough is enough. And still she's continuing with these policies of treating online mean comments on the internet as more of a threat, more of a concern than actual terrorists on the streets. It's absolutely baffling to me. Let's talk about Theresa May. You know, she was in a position where she could have seized on this populist wave that swept Europe over the past 18 months. She completely failed. She failed to be bold, which is what she needed to be. She would have had the support of the population if she'd done that. You know, she's got the leadership skills of a dishcloth. She keeps getting in spats with Trump, you know, just to virtue signal even more about how she's, you know, not like Trump. You know, she's on course to lose an election, according to the current polls, to a man who literally supports terrorist groups and socialist policies that have wrecked nations like Venezuela. That's how pathetic she is. How on earth, Michael, is Theresa May still in office, and what's it going to take to turf her out?
Well, it's quite incredible. If you look at that, the Davos event where you had Donald Trump lay out his vision, which was basically this phenomenal vision for an America that had strong borders, that welcomed only those that had something to contribute and wanted to be part of the, sort of his vision for America. And you can contrast that with Theresa May's speech, where no one can actually remember much of what she said because it was just so dull, so boring. And yeah, what you see now in the Conservative Party is that all of the favourites to now succeed Theresa May, and there's quite a bit of speculation here in the UK, of course, that she may be ousted. All of the favourites to succeed Theresa May are Jacob Rees-Mogg, Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, all campaigned for leave, for Brexit in the referendum we had here in Britain. And I think that speaks to me in that people have had enough, really, of this slow plodding approach. You know, a lot of people went out and voted leave to get back control of Britain's borders. And we're now being told by the government that's not going to happen until at least 2021. Oh, and by the way, the government want you to believe that in 2019, when we leave the EU, we then have to enter a transition period whereby we'll still be having to listen to EU laws, and we'll having to implement new EU laws as well. The whole thing's a complete dog's dinner, and that's why you're now seeing Brexiteers surge of support. That's why you're seeing serious doubts in Theresa May. Brexit is not being delivered, and there's a lot of impatience growing and a lot of anger as well.
And I want to get more into Brexit after the break. I put out a tweet a couple of days ago, you know, retweet for Rees-Mogg being Prime Minister. I think it got about 10,000 retweets. Talking about Mogmentum. He's got a hell of a lot of Mogmentum since that incident at the university on, I think it was Friday, where he confronted, not in an aggressive way, but to actually shut down and shame those thuggish, they call them protesters, they weren't protesters. So there's a lot of momentum behind Mogg right now, a lot of support. We'll talk about it after the break with Michael Heaver. This is the Alex Jones Show live, Infowars.com. We'll be back. We are back live with Michael Heaver of Westmonster.com, who hails from the current acid attack capital of Europe, as do I, London. And I wanted to ask Michael about that. Michael, we've seen this surge in knife crime. We're going to get back into Brexit in a second, but we've seen this surge in knife crime and acid attacks, especially over the course of the last year. Violent crime way up. Have we nailed down if there is a correlation between this surge in violent crime and acid attacks with mass migration and with overpopulation?
Well, look, Paul, I certainly think the areas of London now become very lawless. We saw at the end of last year a news story emerge of delivery drivers in swathes of London after certain times at night, when it got dark, refusing basically to deliver anymore. I mean, if that isn't a no-go area, I don't know what is. And what we're seeing, I think, is a lot of different factors playing into this. I think we're seeing a cut in police numbers and law and order, really, in Britain has gone so soft now. The messages that we send out to our youngsters are so weak. We do not send out a strong enough message. And you're right, the statistics on this are absolutely horrendous. If you look at something like knife crime, 21% increase year on year. Gun crime in London, up 44% since 2014. Robberies year on year across the country, up 29%. Reported rape, up 29%. So this isn't, although acid attacks, we're seeing this as a new phenomenon, unfortunately, that's a scourge in our streets. I think there's a wider context to this, actually, Paul, which is that we're seeing a complete breakdown in law and order as a result of a very, very weak approach, as a result of cutting police numbers. And we're really seeing violent crime especially rising nationally at huge numbers. As I say, a 20% year-on-year increase in knife crime, knife offences, a 44% increase in London on gun crime since 2014. These are huge rises in relatively small amounts of time. So it's clearly not going away anytime soon. And if we don't change tact in this country and start actually having neighbourhoods where we see police on the street, because you never see it anymore, then I'm afraid we're going to see this scourge of violence continue, I'm afraid.
Yeah, a lot of those police are probably too busy knocking on people's doors because they said something offensive on Facebook. Again, 3,395 people arrested for offensive online comments. They said it's not practical for police to investigate all crime, and yet we have this wave of violent crime, this wave of acid attacks. But don't worry, because Sadiq Khan, his main policy over the past month or two has been the implementation of transgender toilets in London, and we know that that's obviously more important than acid attacks. As he said, actual no-go zones now in areas of London, which again, the media claims all day long don't exist. They do exist for the people who have to go into them and refuse to do so for their own safety. I want to move quick. We've got about 7 minutes left, Michael. The NHS. Yesterday, Trump tweeted about it based off of what Nigel Farage said on Fox News, basically, that people were protesting on the streets about the state of the NHS. Again, not a slight against the people who work for the NHS, because that is one hell of a tough job. But he drew attention to it. The left, again, went crazy. They don't go crazy when Corbyn talks about it, because he's God, obviously. But when Trump talks about the problems with the NHS, they go insane because they treat it as some kind of religious deity that can't be criticised. Michael, does the NHS, which for our American audience is basically socialised healthcare, does it really live up to its moniker right now in this country as the envy of the world?
Well, look, you've had doctors and nurses in this country now describe it as third world at times. That's their words, not mine. And Nigel Farage was making a very basic point. There's a complete state of denial in Britain over this very, very basic fact, Paul. The last set of annual population growth figures showed that the UK population increased by 538,000 in 1 year. That is the highest amount for 70 years. Now, it wasn't all driven by mass migration, but 62% of it was. These are the official government statistics. How can a country like Britain have over 500,000 a year population growth? That's a hell of a lot of patients. There's a hell of a lot of babies. There's a hell of a lot of young people. There's a hell of a lot of people needing care. How can that not have an impact on hospitals? And as I say, the thing that frustrates me over here is you'll see TV report after TV report after TV report with nurses, doctors, and fantastic medical staff at their wits' end saying, we cannot cope with this. We've got people waiting in corridors for hours because we have nowhere to put them. And yet never do you see in any of these reports this correlation with this explosion in population growth. As I say, 538,000 UK population growth, the last set of figures, the highest for 70 years. And no one makes that correlation. Nigel Farage dared to do it. Nigel Farage pointed this out, the fact that if you have this rapidly expanding population, it pushes your health system to the limit. And yet no one in this country is talking about it. No one wants to deal with it. And we see, as I say, report after report with nurses, doctors and all the rest of it saying our workload's becoming completely and utterly ridiculous. We cannot handle this many people. We have too many patients. Yeah, because the population is surging, fueled by a mass migration boom that no one wants to talk about, no one wants to control. And even after voting for Brexit, we're not seeing politicians, we're not seeing the government saying we're going to bring down numbers at this time and this is how we're going to do it. There is no plan to do that. And again, I sense that there's massive dissatisfaction and growing anger at the lack of action on controlling Britain's borders and bringing these numbers down to sensible levels.
I mean, I've had conversations with leftists, and I asked them, you love and support the NHS, right? Yeah, of course. And you also support mass uncontrolled immigration and population growth that's never going to end. Yeah, I support that as well. No, you can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it. It doesn't work. It's collapsing. I want to move on to the Trump visit, of course. The Corbyn-Khan-driven narrative, Michael, is that most Brits don't want to see Donald Trump visit the UK. We've seen a lot of frothing and whining about this over the past few months. Of course, we've had calls to outright ban him from the UK, some of which are being supported by councils in London. Does that paint an accurate picture of exactly what the people of the UK think about Trump's potential visit?
Well, no, we've seen new figures out today that show there's been a 14% surge since December in the amount of people in Britain that want to see a state visit from Trump. The amazing paradox to me, Paul, is that you have Barack Obama, who came to Britain, let's not forget, before the Brexit referendum and basically said, if you guys dare to vote for your country's independence, you better know you're going to be back of the queue for a trade deal. And then you have President Trump, who couldn't be further from that, who sits down with the British Prime Minister recently and said, we want to massively increase trade, we want to bump a trade deal, we want to create jobs. And yet you have idiots in this country who turn around and say, oh, we couldn't possibly have the US president. It's an amazing paradox. But no, I think opinions changing very, very quickly. I think a lot of the media scrutiny of Trump is way over the top here. You talk about things like the Dow Jones. I mean, that's virtually underreported, the things that have gone on. The massive economic boom that's on its way in America is virtually underreported. And I think what an amazing prospect it is for Brexit Britain to have such a strong ally, so openly welcoming of increasing trade and all the rest of it between our two countries to create jobs. I think it's a marvellous thing. And I think the European Union should be a little bit worried because some of Trump's comments about what he thinks of them aren't too flattering. I don't think Trump's a fan of the protectionist, globalist European Union.
Well, exactly. I mean, when it comes to Trump's visit, I mean, you got to ask the question at some point, is Sadiq Khan and his ilk, by constantly banging on about how they want to ban Trump, at what point are they harming the national interest? I mean, that's the question that I often ask myself. But we got a couple of minutes left. Michael, just tell people where they can find you on Twitter and about westmonster.com.
Yeah, so I'm at Michael_Heaver on Twitter. It's westmonster.com. Little play on words there from Westminster here in London, where the politicians and lords, all the rest of the establishment hang out, where we're trying to challenge that a bit with Westmonster. And basically, you're going to be seeing a lot of more video content and things like that coming up from us. We're basically trying to highlight things, guys. So many things in Britain get underreported. Did you know, if I'm quick, New Year's, 4 young men stabbed to death in 4 separate incidents. It came and went. It was virtually forgotten in a couple of weeks. And we're seeing these stabbings. We're seeing this horrendous surge in violence that's such a scourge, that's killing young men at such a rapid rate. We're seeing Brexit being sold out. We're seeing things like illegal immigration. That's becoming an absolute nightmare because we've got open borders. We at Westminster are highlighting all of these things. I'm highlighting all these things. That we've got big momentum here in Britain, and I think people are sick and tired of the establishment. Brexit shows that. Trump's showing that. And Paul, your numbers and info will show that as well.
Indeed, they do. Quick prediction. Give me a yes or no. Is Theresa May going to be the leader of the Conservative Party at the next election? Is she still going to be in power?
Nope. Don't think so.
I hope that prediction comes to fruition and that we get an onrush of Mogmentum, which is what looks like it's taking hold right now. Michael Heaver, thanks for joining us. The website is westmonster.com. Thanks again.